I was standing in my driveway washing mud off my John Deere 4520 when Patricia Henderson came storming across the street like a tornado in a floral sundress, her phone already pressed to her ear and her free hand waving dramatically in the air. The morning sun was barely up over the Georgia pines, and I had planned on getting some work done on the back 40 before the summer heat became unbearable. My property sat on the edge of Meadowbrook Estates, a sprawling subdivision about 20 miles outside of Savannah that had grown up around what used to be farmland. When my grandfather bought this land back in 1962, it was nothing but cotton fields and peach orchards as far as the eye could see. Now it was half manicured lawns and half working agriculture, which made for some interesting conversations with the newer residents who had moved in over the past decade. I had inherited the property from my grandfather 3 years ago. The original farmhouse sat on 15 acres, with another 45 acres stretching out behind it that I still worked. Most of it was leased to a local farmer who grew soybeans and corn, but I kept 10 acres for my own vegetable operation and a small orchard. The tractor was essential for everything from tilling to hauling equipment, and it was parked exactly where it always was, in the gravel area beside my detached garage. Patricia stopped at the end of my driveway, her perfectly styled blonde hair not moving an inch despite her aggressive march across the street. She was in her early 50s, married to some investment banker who worked in Savannah, and had been the president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA for the past 4 years. I had dealt with her exactly twice since inheriting the property, both times politely but firmly reminding her that my property predated the HOA by about 40 years and was not subject to their rules. "Yes, officer, I am looking at it right now," she said loudly into her phone, making sure I could hear every word. "It is absolutely massive, completely inappropriate for a residential neighborhood, and it has been sitting there for weeks creating an eyesore for everyone who has to look at it." I turned off the hose and wiped my hands on my jeans. The tractor had been parked in that exact spot for 3 years, along with my grandfather's old Ford tractor that sat under a carport nearby. This was not a new development. "Madam, can I help you with something?" I called out, even though I knew exactly what this was about. She held up one finger at me in a gesture that clearly meant to wait while she continued her phone conversation. "Yes, I will stay on the line. The address is 1847 Meadowbrook Lane. The owner is being completely unreasonable about removing this industrial equipment from what is supposed to be a nice neighborhood." I walked down my driveway toward her, taking my time. Patricia had a tendency to escalate situations, and I had learned that staying calm was the best way to handle her. Behind her, I could see a few other neighbors starting to peek out their windows. Great. Nothing like a morning show for everyone on the street. "Patricia, that tractor has been parked there since before you moved into the neighborhood," I said reasonably. "Same place it has always been." She pulled the phone away from her ear slightly. "That does not make it acceptable, Brian. We have standards in this community. Just because you inherited some old farm property does not mean you can turn this neighborhood into some kind of agricultural junkyard. It is one tractor, parked on my property, which I use to work my land. Your supposed land is subject to HOA regulations just like everyone else's," she snapped. "I have been more than patient with you, but this ends today. You are in violation of at least 6 different covenants, and I am going to make sure they are enforced." I took a deep breath. "Patricia, we have been over this. My property is not part of the HOA. It was here first. Your neighborhood was built around it." "That is not what our lawyer says," she replied smugly, then turned her attention back to her phone. "Yes, I am still here. Is someone coming?" I walked back toward my garage, shaking my head. If she wanted to waste the police department's time, that was her choice. I had work to do, and I was not going to let Patricia Henderson's delusions about her authority ruin my morning. The vegetables in the back field needed attention, and I had promised the local farmer's market I would have 24 bushels of tomatoes ready by Saturday. 20 minutes later, I was in my garage organizing some tools when I heard a vehicle pull up. Through the open garage door, I could see a Chatham County Sheriff's Patrol car parking on the street. 2 deputies got out, and Patricia immediately rushed over to them, gesturing wildly at my property and no doubt spinning whatever tale she had prepared. I grabbed a folder from my workbench and walked out to meet them. Both deputies looked young, probably early 30s, and neither of them seemed particularly excited about being there. The taller one was already looking around the property with an expression that suggested he had figured out this was probably not a legitimate complaint. "Good morning, officers," I said pleasantly. "I am Brian Zimmerman. This is my property." The taller deputy nodded. "Morning, sir." "I am Deputy Collins. This is Deputy Martinez. We received a call about some kind of dispute over equipment on residential property." "There is no dispute," Patricia interjected before I could answer. "There is a clear violation of HOA regulations, and I need you to enforce them. That tractor is prohibited under our community standards, and he has refused to remove it despite multiple warnings." Deputy Martinez was writing something in a small notebook. "Sir, are you a member of this HOA?" "No, I am not." "He has to be," Patricia insisted. "His property is within the Meadowbrook Estates boundaries." "My property predates the HOA by 4 decades, I explained calmly. "My grandfather bought this land in 1962. The subdivision was not built until the early 2000s. They built around my property, but my land was never incorporated into the HOA. Deputy Collins looked at Patricia. "Madam, if his property is not part of the HOA, then HOA regulations would not apply to him." "But it is part of the community," she sputtered. "You cannot just have farm equipment sitting in a residential neighborhood. There have to be zoning laws or something." I opened my folder and pulled out several documents. "Deputy, if it helps, I have all the relevant paperwork here. My property is zoned agricultural, has been since long before any of these houses were built. I have an agricultural exemption for the equipment, and all of my farming operations are completely legal and permitted." Deputy Collins took the papers and began looking through them. I had learned early on to keep everything organized and easily accessible. My grandfather had taught me that. The folder contained the original deed, the current property survey showing the agricultural zoning, my agricultural exemption certificate from the county, and several other documents that clearly established my right to operate as a working farm. Patricia was turning red. "This is ridiculous. You cannot just hide behind some old paperwork to avoid being a good neighbor. The HOA has rules for a reason, and you are not special just because you think you are a farmer." "Madam, I am going to need you to calm down," Deputy Martinez said, glancing up from where he had been reading over his partner's shoulder. "I will not calm down. I am the HOA president, and I have every right to ensure our community standards are maintained. Do you know how much property values are affected by this kind of thing?" Deputy Collins handed the papers back to me. "Sir, everything here looks in order. Your property is clearly zoned agricultural and you have all the proper exemptions for farm equipment. There is no violation here." "What?" Patricia looked like she might actually explode. "You are not even going to make him move it." "Madam, we cannot make someone remove legal property from their own land just because a neighborhood association does not like looking at it." Deputy Martinez explained patiently. Mr. Zimmerman is not part of your HOA. His land is properly zoned, and he has every right to keep farm equipment on agricultural property. This is unbelievable, Patricia hissed. I pay taxes for police protection, and you are just going to let him do whatever he wants. We are enforcing the law, madam, Deputy Collins said, and the law is very clear here. Is there anything else we can help you with today? Patricia looked between the deputies and me, her face now fully flushed with anger. You have not heard the last of this, Brian. The HOA has resources, and we will find a way to deal with this problem. That sounded like a threat, Deputy Martinez observed quietly. It was not a threat, it was a promise, Patricia shot back. We have lawyers and connections, and we will not tolerate this kind of behavior in our community. Deputy Collins sighed. Madam, I strongly suggest you do not harass Mr. Zimmerman. If he is legally operating within his rights and you continue to cause problems, that could be considered harassment. Patricia opened her mouth, closed it, then spun on her heel and marched back toward her house across the street. The deputies watched her go, then turned back to me. Sorry about that, sir, Deputy Collins said. Unfortunately, we get a lot of these HOA calls. People think we can enforce their neighborhood rules. I understand, I replied. I appreciate you coming out and handling it professionally. You might want to keep that paperwork handy, Deputy Martinez suggested. Something tells me this is not over. They were right, of course. I had dealt with enough difficult people in my life to know that Patricia Henderson was not the type to let something go just because the police told her she was wrong. But I had work to do, and I was not going to spend my day worrying about an angry HOA president with delusions of authority. The deputies left, and I went back to my day. I spent the next few hours working in the back field, using the tractor to haul compost and prepare new beds for a fall planting. The work was hot and dirty, but it was honest work, the kind that left you tired but satisfied at the end of the day. My grandfather had taught me to farm these fields, and I was not about to let some suburban HOA dictate what I could and could not do with my own land. Around noon, I was back at the house cleaning up when my phone rang. The number was local but not one I recognized. Hello, Mr. Zimmerman. This is Donald Chen from Chen and Associates law firm. I represent the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. Here we go, I thought. Patricia had not wasted any time. What can I do for you, Mr. Chen? I am calling regarding your property at 1847 Meadowbrook Lane. It has come to our attention that you are operating agricultural equipment and possibly running a farming operation within the boundaries of a residential community. The HOA has asked me to inform you that this is in violation of several community covenants and to request that you cease these activities immediately. Mr. Chen, my property is not part of the HOA. It predates your organization by decades, and it is zoned agricultural. I have all the proper exemptions and permits. There was a pause on the other end. I understand there may be some dispute about the HOA boundaries. However, my client is prepared to take legal action if necessary to protect the interests of the community. Your client can take whatever action she wants, I said calmly. But she is going to lose. My property rights are clearly established, and I am operating completely within the law. If you want to waste time and money pursuing this, that is your choice. Mr. Zimmerman, I do not think you understand the resources the HOA has at their disposal. It would be much simpler for everyone if you would simply relocate your equipment to a less visible location and perhaps scale back your agricultural activities. I am not relocating anything, and I am not scaling back anything. This is my property, and I will use it as I see fit within the bounds of the law. Another pause. Very well. You will be hearing from us again soon." He hung up, and I set my phone down on the kitchen counter. This was escalating faster than I had expected, but I was not surprised. Patricia struck me as the type who could not stand being told no, especially not in front of her neighbors. She would push this as far as she could, regardless of whether she had any legal ground to stand on. I called my own lawyer, an old friend named Robert Green, who had handled the property transfer when I inherited it from my grandfather. He listened to the whole story, asked a few questions about the paperwork I had shown the deputies, and then assured me that I was on solid legal ground. "Brian, you have nothing to worry about," Robert said. "Your property is grandfathered in, you have agricultural zoning, and you have all the proper exemptions. An HOA cannot force their rules on property that is not part of their organization. If they try to push this, they will lose, and they will probably end up paying your legal fees." "Good to know," I said, though something tells me Patricia Henderson is not going to let logic get in the way of her crusade. Unfortunately, you are probably right. HOA disputes can get ugly, especially when you have someone in charge who takes things personally. Just keep documenting everything. Do not engage with her directly if you can avoid it, and let me know if they actually file anything." I promised I would and hung up. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly, which should have been my first warning that Patricia was planning something bigger than I had anticipated. The next morning, I woke up to find a bright orange notice stapled to my mailbox post. It was an official-looking document on HOA letterhead, declaring my property in violation of multiple covenants, and demanding that I appear at a special HOA board meeting the following Tuesday evening to address the issues. The notice listed everything from unauthorized commercial agriculture, to improper storage of industrial equipment, to failure to maintain aesthetic community standards. I took a picture of the notice and sent it to Robert, then pulled it down and added it to my growing file of HOA nonsense. They could hold all the meetings they wanted, but they had no authority over my property, and I was not going to waste my time attending their little kangaroo court. What I did not expect was for Patricia to start showing up at my property. The first time was that same afternoon. I was working on repairing a fence line near the road when her white Mercedes SUV pulled into my driveway. She got out holding a clipboard and started walking around my property, taking pictures and making notes. "Can I help you?" I called out. "I am documenting violations for our legal case," she announced. "This is still technically within HOA boundaries, so I have every right to photograph anything visible from the street. You are on my driveway, which is private property. Please leave. I am collecting evidence of your violations." "You cannot stop me from doing that." I pulled out my phone. "Actually, I can. This is private property and you are trespassing. Leave now or I will call the sheriff again." She glared at me but walked back to her vehicle. Before she left, she made a show of taking more pictures from the street, making sure I could see her photographing my tractor, my garage, and anything else she could point her phone at. This became a pattern over the next few days. Patricia would drive by multiple times a day, sometimes stopping to take pictures, sometimes just slowing down to stare at my property. Other HOA board members started doing the same thing. I recognized Deborah Nash, the HOA vice president, and Kevin Miller, the treasurer, both making multiple passes by my house. On Friday afternoon, things escalated further. I came home from picking up supplies in Savannah to find a professional photographer standing in my driveway with an expensive-looking camera, taking detailed photos of everything on my property. "Excuse me, what are you doing?" I asked, parking my truck and getting out. The photographer, a thin man in his 40s wearing khakis and a polo shirt, lowered his camera. "I was hired to document this property. Are you the owner?" "I am, and you are trespassing." "Who hired you?" "I am not at liberty to say." I was told this was for a legal case and that I had permission to photograph from the driveway. "You absolutely do not have permission. You need to leave immediately." He looked uncertain. "I was paid for a full session. I need to get the shots I was contracted for." "You can either leave on your own, or I can call the police and have you removed for trespassing. Your choice." The photographer muttered something under his breath but packed up his equipment and left. I immediately called Robert and told him what had happened. He advised me to install security cameras, which I probably should have done already. That evening, I drove to a home improvement store and bought a complete security camera system. I spent the next morning installing cameras covering my driveway, the front of my house, the area where my tractors were parked, and the entrance to my back field. Everything was connected to my phone, so I could monitor it remotely. The cameras proved to be a good investment, because over the weekend, I caught Patricia, Deborah, and 2 other women I did not recognize walking around my property on Saturday evening, peering into my garage windows and trying to get close-up photos of my equipment. I was in Savannah having dinner with some friends when the motion alert started going off on my phone. I watched the live feed as the 4 women crept around my property like they were on some kind of covert mission. Patricia was directing the others, pointing at different things and having them photograph everything from various angles. I called the sheriff's department from the restaurant. The same 2 deputies from before, Collins and Martinez, responded to the call. By the time they arrived, I had driven back home and was waiting in my driveway. The 4 women were still there, now attempting to photograph the back of my property by walking along the tree line. "Ladies, what are you doing here?" Deputy Collins called out as he and his partner approached. Patricia came marching out of the shadows, looking indignant. "We are collecting evidence for our legal case. This property is in violation of multiple community standards." "You are trespassing," Deputy Martinez said. "This is private property and you have been asked to leave." "We have every right to document violations in our community," Deborah Nash chimed in. "No, you do not," Deputy Collins said firmly. "This is not HOA property. This is Mr. Zimmerman's private land and you have no authority here. You need to leave immediately." "This is harassment," Patricia declared. "We are simply trying to protect our neighborhood and we are being treated like criminals." "You are currently trespassing on private property after being warned before," Deputy Martinez said. "That is actually a crime. I suggest you leave before we decide to press charges." The 4 women huddled together, whispering urgently. Finally, they walked back toward the street where their cars were parked, but Patricia could not resist getting in the last word. "You are making a huge mistake protecting him," she called back to the deputies. "When our lawsuit succeeds, you are going to regret not helping us enforce community standards." After they left, Deputy Collins turned to me. "Mr. Zimmerman, I strongly suggest you consider getting a restraining order against Miss Henderson. This is going beyond normal HOA disputes." "I am documenting everything," I said. "I have cameras now, so at least I have evidence if this continues." "Good," Deputy Martinez said. "Because something tells me it will. We will file a report about tonight's incident. That should help if you need to pursue legal action." They were right to be concerned. Over the next week, the harassment intensified. Patricia started leaving notes on my mailbox, tucked under my windshield wipers, even slipped under my front door. The notes ranged from polite requests to move my equipment to angry demands that I comply with HOA rules to outright threats about what would happen if I did not cooperate. I saved every single note, photographed them, and added them to the file I was building. Robert assured me that we had more than enough evidence to pursue harassment charges if necessary, but he suggested waiting to see how their threatened lawsuit developed first. The special HOA meeting came and went. I did not attend, obviously, but several of my actual neighbors who lived on the same street did. One of them, an older man named Frank who lived 2 houses down and had always been friendly, stopped by the next day to tell me what had happened. "Brian, that meeting was a circus," Frank said, shaking his head. "Patricia spent an hour showing photos of your property and ranting about how you were destroying property values. She has convinced most of the board that you are running some kind of illegal farm operation and that the HOA needs to take aggressive action to stop you." "Did anyone point out that my property is not part of the HOA?" "A few people tried," Frank said. "I stood up and said that your land was here long before any of our houses and that you have every right to farm it. But Patricia shut down anyone who disagreed with her. She said the HOA's lawyer had assured her they had a strong case." "Her lawyer is either lying to her or she is lying about what he said," I replied. "There is no case. My property rights are clear." "I believe you," Frank said, "but you should know that Patricia got the board to approve $20,000 for legal fees to pursue this. She is serious about fighting you. $20,000 to harass someone for legally using their own property. It was insane, but I had learned that HOAs could get away with spending their members' money on all kinds of ridiculous things. The people in that neighborhood were funding Patricia's personal vendetta, whether they knew it or not. 2 weeks after the meeting, I was served with legal papers. The HOA was suing me for violating community covenants, seeking an injunction to force me to remove all agricultural equipment from my property and to cease all farming operations. They were also demanding I pay $15,000 in fines for ongoing violations and another $10,000 in legal fees. I took the papers straight to Robert's office. He read through them, shaking his head the entire time. "This is one of the most frivolous lawsuits I have seen in my entire career," he said. "They have absolutely no standing. Your property is not part of their HOA, they have no authority over you, and they are going to lose spectacularly." "How long will this take?" I asked. "Probably a few months to get before a judge, unless we can get it dismissed earlier on summary judgment, which we absolutely should be able to do given how clear-cut this is." "And what do I need to do?" "Nothing except let me handle it. Keep living your life, keep farming your land, and do not let them bait you into doing anything that could complicate matters. Document any further harassment, but otherwise just ignore them." That turned out to be harder than it sounded. With a lawsuit filed, Patricia seemed to feel emboldened. The drive-bys increased. Notes appeared almost daily. Other HOA members started giving me dirty looks at the grocery store and the farmer's market. Things came to a head 3 weeks later when I woke up on a Tuesday morning to find that someone had spray-painted "Illegal farm leave now" in bright red letters across my driveway. I called the sheriff's department immediately. This time, a different deputy responded, an older officer named Deputy Watkins, who took one look at the vandalism and immediately asked about security cameras. "I have them," I said. "Give me a minute to pull up the footage." The cameras had captured everything. At 2:30 in the morning, Patricia Henderson's white Mercedes SUV had pulled up to the end of my driveway with its lights off. Patricia herself got out of the passenger seat, while a man I did not recognize got out of the driver's side. Together, they spray-painted the message across my driveway, got back in the vehicle, and drove away. Deputy Watkins watched the footage twice, then called for backup. "Mr. Zimmerman, I need you to send that video file to me immediately. We are going to pay Miss Henderson a visit." Within an hour, 3 patrol cars were parked on the street, and I watched from my porch as deputies knocked on Patricia Henderson's door across the street. She answered, still in her bathrobe, and I could see her face go pale even from a distance as they showed her something on a tablet, probably the security footage. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes before Patricia was led out of her house in handcuffs. Her husband, a tall man with graying hair who I had only seen a handful of times, stood in the doorway looking shocked as his wife was placed in the back of a patrol car. Deputy Watkins came back across the street to update me. "Miss Henderson has been arrested for criminal trespassing and vandalism. The man in the video is her brother, and we have units heading to his address now to pick him up as well." "I honestly did not expect her to go this far," I said. "HOA disputes can bring out the worst in people," Deputy Watkins said. "Especially people who are used to getting their way. This will probably help your legal case quite a bit." He was right about that. When Robert heard about the arrest, he immediately filed a motion to dismiss the HOA's lawsuit and a countersuit for harassment, vandalism, and abuse of process. He also helped me file for a restraining order against Patricia Henderson personally. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal activity. Patricia was released on bail but forbidden from coming within 500 feet of my property. The HOA's lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, meaning they could not refile it, and they were ordered to pay my legal fees, which came to just over $8,000. The countersuit took a bit longer, but the evidence was overwhelming. In addition to the spray painting incident, we had documented dozens of instances of harassment, trespassing, and intimidation. Patricia's own notes were particularly damning, especially the ones where she had explicitly threatened to make my life difficult if I did not comply with her demands. The HOA tried to distance themselves from Patricia's actions, claiming she had been acting independently and not on behalf of the organization. But Robert produced minutes from HOA board meetings where Patricia had explicitly stated her intention to pressure me into compliance by any means necessary, and where the board had approved funding for her campaign against me. In the end, Patricia Henderson was convicted of vandalism and criminal trespassing. She received a year of probation, a $5,000 fine, and was required to pay restitution for cleaning my driveway and my legal fees related to the criminal case. She also resigned as HOA president, though it was unclear whether that was voluntary or if the board had forced her out. The HOA itself was ordered to pay me an additional $30,000 in damages for the harassment campaign and abuse of legal process. Several board members resigned in the aftermath, and the organization was required to send a formal letter to all residents explaining that my property was not subject to HOA rules and that I had every right to operate a farm on my land. During all of this, I had continued farming. The vegetables grew, the seasons changed, and the work continued as it always had. My grandfather had taught me that the land does not care about human drama, it just needs tending. So I tended it. One afternoon in early September, I was working in the back field when Frank stopped by. He brought a 6-pack of beer and we sat on the tailgate of my truck, looking out over the rows of vegetables. "You know, half the neighborhood thinks you are a hero now," Frank said. "Patricia made a lot of enemies over the years with her HOA nonsense. People are glad someone finally stood up to her." "I was not trying to be a hero," I said. "I was just trying to farm my land in peace." "Sometimes that is what being a hero is," Frank replied. "Just standing your ground when someone tries to push you around." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking beer and watching the sun start to sink toward the horizon. In the distance, I could hear the sounds of the neighborhood, kids playing, someone mowing their lawn, the normal sounds of suburban life. But here, on my land, it was quiet except for the breeze through the corn and the occasional bird call. "What are you going to do with the settlement money?" Frank asked eventually. I had been thinking about that. "Probably invest it back into the farm. Maybe buy a newer tractor. The old John Deere is running fine, but it is not getting any younger. Maybe expand the orchard a bit." Frank laughed. Patricia would lose her mind if she knew her harassment campaign ended up funding improvements to the very thing she was trying to get rid of. "Good thing she has to stay 500 feet away then," I said. The restraining order was still in effect and would remain so for another year. Patricia had moved out of the neighborhood entirely, divorcing her husband in the process. The whole situation had apparently been the last straw in an already troubled marriage. Her brother had also been convicted and received a similar sentence. The new HOA president was a reasonable woman named Rachel, who had made a point of introducing herself and apologizing for the previous board's behavior. She assured me that the HOA had no interest in continuing any kind of dispute with me, and that they simply wanted to coexist peacefully. That was fine with me. I had never wanted a fight in the first place. As fall turned to winter and winter turned to spring, life returned to normal. The tractor sat in its usual spot beside the garage, exactly where it had always been. I worked the land, sold vegetables at the farmer's market, and lived the life my grandfather had built and passed down to me. Sometimes I would see new neighbors moving into the subdivision, and I wondered if anyone told them about the crazy HOA president who had waged war against the farmer next door. But mostly, people just waved when they drove by, and I waved back, and everyone went about their business. One warm afternoon in May, about a year after the whole ordeal had started, I was planting tomatoes when a car I did not recognize pulled into my driveway. A young couple got out, probably in their late 20s, and walked toward me with friendly smiles. "Hi," the woman said. "We just bought the house 3 doors down. Are you Brian?" "I am," I said, pulling off my work gloves to shake their hands. "I am Jessica, this is my husband Mike," she said. "We heard about what happened with the old HOA president. We just wanted to introduce ourselves and let you know that we think it is really cool that you are farming here. My grandparents had a farm in South Carolina, and I miss being around that kind of thing." "Well, you are welcome to stop by any time," I said. "I sell vegetables at the farmer's market on Saturdays if you are ever interested." We chatted for a few minutes about the neighborhood and the farm. They asked questions about what I grew and how long the property had been in my family. It was a pleasant conversation, the kind that made me hopeful that maybe the worst was truly behind us. After they left, I went back to planting. The soil was rich and dark, perfect for growing. My grandfather used to say that good soil was worth more than gold because you could not eat gold, but good soil would feed you for a lifetime. The tractor sat nearby, waiting for the next job. It would need servicing soon, probably new filters and an oil change. The kind of maintenance my grandfather had taught me to do myself, just like he had taught me everything else about keeping this land alive and productive. A breeze picked up, carrying the smell of fresh earth and growing things. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the hum of a lawnmower and the laughter of children playing. The subdivision and the farm coexisted, just like they always should have, each doing their own thing without interfering with the other. That evening, as the sun set over the back 40, I stood on my porch with a cold drink and looked out over my land. The same land my grandfather had worked, the same land I would hopefully pass down to my own children someday. Patricia Henderson and her HOA crusade were nothing but a memory now, a cautionary tale about what happens when people let power go to their heads and forget that everyone has rights, not just the people who agree with them. The legal battles had been stressful and expensive, even with the eventual settlement. But they had also reaffirmed something important, that standing up for your rights mattered, that documentation and preparation were crucial, and that the law ultimately sided with people who were in the right, even when they faced opponents with more money and more connections. I had kept every piece of paper, every photograph, every note. The folder that had started with just my agricultural exemption papers and property deeds had grown into a comprehensive record of everything that had happened. It sat in my office now, a reminder that sometimes you had to fight for what was yours, but also that fighting with the truth on your side made all the difference. The phone rang inside the house. It was Robert, calling to let me know that the final check from the HOA settlement had cleared and that the legal case was now completely closed. Every loose end tied up, every obligation fulfilled. "Congratulations," Robert said. "You are officially done with all of this." "Thanks for everything, Robert," I said. "I could not have done it without you." "You did the hard part," he replied. "You stood your ground and did not let them bully you into giving up your rights. I just filed the paperwork." After we hung up, I went back outside. The spring evening was perfect, cool but not cold, with a clear sky starting to fill with stars. I walked out to where the tractor was parked and ran my hand along its faded green paint. My grandfather had bought this machine in 1978, and it was still running strong nearly 50 years later. That was quality craftsmanship, the kind of thing you did not see much anymore. Tomorrow, I would use it to till the north field for a new planting of corn. Next week, I would use it to haul compost to the vegetable beds. It would sit right here in this spot, visible from the street, doing exactly what it was meant to do, serving as a tool for working the land. And if anyone had a problem with that, well, I had a folder full of legal precedents and agricultural exemption papers that said they could take their problems somewhere else. I smiled at the thought and headed back inside. There was seed to sort, equipment to maintain, and 100 other small tasks that came with running a farm. The kind of work that never truly ended, but that gave life meaning and purpose. Patricia Henderson had tried to take that away from me, tried to force me to give up my land and my livelihood because it did not fit her vision of what a neighborhood should look like. But she had failed, and in failing, she had actually made my position stronger than ever. The legal judgments were now a matter of public record, establishing clearly and permanently that my property was not subject to HOA rules, and that I had every right to farm it. Future HOA presidents would think twice before trying anything similar. Future neighbors would know, before they even moved in, that there was a working farm on the edge of their subdivision and that it was not going anywhere. That was exactly how it should be. I settled into my evening routine, making dinner and catching up on some paperwork. Outside, the spring darkness deepened, and the neighborhood grew quiet. Somewhere out there in one of those neat suburban houses, families were having dinner and watching television and living their lives. And out here on the edge of it all, I was doing the same, just in a different way. The land did not care about HOA politics or legal battles or spray-painted driveways. It just needed someone to work it, to care for it, to keep it productive. My grandfather had done that for decades, and now it was my turn. And someday, if I was lucky, I would pass it on to someone else who would understand its value and continue the tradition. That was the real victory, not the legal settlements or the satisfaction of seeing Patricia Henderson face consequences for her actions. The real victory was still being here, still farming, still connected to the land and the work that had sustained my family for generations. I finished my dinner and cleaned up the kitchen, then spent some time reviewing my plans for the coming growing season. There were new varieties of tomatoes I wanted to try, and I was thinking about expanding the berry patches. The local farmers market had been asking if I could provide more produce, and I thought I probably could if I managed my space efficiently. These were good problems to have, the kind that came from success rather than conflict. The kind my grandfather would have appreciated. Before bed, I checked the security camera feeds one last time. Everything was quiet, just the occasional car passing by on the street, headlights briefly illuminating the driveway before disappearing into the night. The tractor sat silent and solid in its spot, exactly where it belonged. I slept well that night, better than I had in months. The weight of the legal battle was finally lifted, and I could focus entirely on the work I loved. Morning came early, as it always did on a farm, and I was up with the sun, ready to start another day. The tractor started on the first try, the engine rumbling to life with that distinctive John Deere sound. I let it warm up while I loaded tools into the small cart I pulled behind it, then headed out to the north field. The morning air was crisp and clean, and the soil was perfect for tilling. As I worked, I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The confrontations, the legal battles, the stress and uncertainty. But also the support from friends and neighbors, the satisfaction of standing up for what was right, and the relief of seeing justice prevail. Patricia Henderson had called the cops about my tractor, certain that she could use the power of the HOA and the legal system to force me to bend to her will. But the cops had left when I showed them my agricultural exemption papers, just like they should have. And when she had escalated to lawsuits and harassment, the legal system had sided with me, just like it should have. The whole experience had taught me that rights meant nothing if you were not willing to defend them, that documentation was invaluable, and that sometimes the people who seemed most powerful were actually just bullies who folded when someone finally stood up to them. It had also reinforced my respect for the law enforcement officers who had handled the situation professionally, for Robert and the legal system that ultimately worked as it should, and for the neighbors who had supported me even when the HOA tried to make me look like the villain. The morning passed quickly, the tractor doing its job efficiently as I prepared the field for planting. By noon, I had accomplished everything I had planned, and the north field was ready for corn. I would plant it tomorrow, timing it perfectly for the growing season ahead. As I drove the tractor back toward the garage, I saw Frank standing in his driveway, waving at me. I pulled over and shut off the engine. "Looking good," Frank called over. "You are going to have a great crop this year." "That is the plan," I said. "Weather cooperates anyway." "Hey, I meant to tell you," Frank said, walking over. The new HOA board approved a proposal to update the community welcome packet. They are going to include information about your farm and explain that your property is not subject to HOA rules. Try to avoid any future confusion. "That is actually a good idea," I said. "Might save everyone some trouble down the road." That is what I thought. Rachel seems to be doing a good job as president. She actually wants to solve problems instead of creating them. "A novel concept for an HOA," I said with a smile. Frank laughed. "Right, who would have thought?" We talked for a few more minutes before I headed back to my garage. I parked the tractor in its usual spot, visible from the street, a symbol of the farm's presence in the neighborhood. Let people see it. Let them know that this was agricultural land, that it had been here long before their houses, and that it would be here long after. The afternoon was spent on smaller tasks, maintaining equipment, organizing supplies, planning next week's work. The kind of steady, productive work that made up the backbone of farming. Nothing dramatic, nothing exciting, just the consistent effort required to keep a farm running. As evening approached, I made myself dinner and ate on the porch, watching the neighborhood wind down for the day. Kids were called inside, garage doors closed, lights came on in windows. The rhythms of suburban life happening all around my little island of agriculture. It was a good life, a life worth fighting for. My grandfather had known that when he bought this land back in 1962. He had known that having your own land, being able to work it and grow things and make a living from it, was something precious, something worth protecting. I had protected it, not just for myself but for his memory and for whoever might come after me. The HOA had tried to take it away, and they had failed. The legal system had recognized my rights and enforced them. Justice, in this case, had actually prevailed. That was worth celebrating, but not by making a big deal out of it. Just by continuing to do the work, continuing to farm the land, continuing to be what I had always been, a farmer on a working farm that happened to sit next to a subdivision. The stars came out, brilliant and clear in the country darkness that still existed here on the edge of the suburbs. I sat on my porch for a long time, just enjoying the quiet and the satisfaction of a day's work well done. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, new challenges, new work to be done. But tonight, I could rest easy knowing that the biggest challenge was behind me. The HOA had thrown everything they had at me, and I had stood firm. The tractor still sat in the driveway. The farm still operated. And I was still here, doing what I loved on land that was rightfully mine. Patricia Henderson had called the cops about my tractor, hoping to force me out. But the cops had left when I showed them my agricultural exemption papers, and everything that came after had only proven that I was in the right all along. Sometimes standing your ground was not about being stubborn or difficult. Sometimes it was about protecting something important, something that had value beyond what others could see. My farm was that for me, and I had successfully defended it. As I finally headed inside for the night, I took one last look at the tractor sitting in its spot, solid and dependable in the moonlight. Tomorrow it would work again, doing what it was built to do, just like I would do what I was meant to do. The land would be here tomorrow, and the day after, and for all the tomorrows to come. And so would I, farming it the way my grandfather had taught me, keeping alive a tradition that mattered more than HOA politics or suburban aesthetics. That was the real story, not the legal battles or the confrontations. The real story was about continuity, about preserving something important, about standing up for the right to live your life and work your land in peace. And in the end, despite everything Patricia Henderson and her HOA had thrown at me, that story had a happy ending. The farm survived, the work continued, and justice was served. I could not ask for anything more than that.